Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, who is our Director of Customer Success. Both of us are here today to answer any questions you may have about Alpha Transform, and you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Today, we have a pretty cool demonstration. It's part 3 of our advanced inspection application series. And this one deals specifically with working with AWS, Amazon Web Services S3, their simple storage solution. So in the past part of these series, we've shown this example with a person who's out in the field with a mobile device, maybe doesn't have an internet connection, and wants to, say, scan a barcode, maybe on a piece of equipment, and have that barcode tell them lots of pieces of information about the particular piece of equipment that they are inspecting. So once it looks up the serial number, it can look up what the model is of the thing that they're inspecting, the date in service, the service history. It could show you a picture of it. It can include links to documentation like installation instructions or specification sheets. And all of that can be handled in SQLite databases, something that I showed you how to do last week. So on top of these SQLite databases and these pictures and these documents, we want to package them all up together and get them onto the mobile device so that they can be accessed offline and in the field. So while it is possible to move the images directly and all of this stuff directly from your computer to the transform filler, that's usually not a very practical suggestion. And the reason is because typically your computer, remarkably, is behind a firewall or something like that. Whereas Amazon S3 allows you to put your files up in a place where they can be accessed by the public internet. And we're going to talk about that today and how to set it up and make it all work. Okay, so Amazon S3, if you don't know, is called the Simple Storage Solution. And they call it simple, but there's actually an awful lot to it. I'm going to take you through it today. It's certainly not everything you could possibly know about S3, which is quite a lot, but it's enough to get you going. Think of S3 as like a giant hard drive in the cloud that can store your data. You can put it up, you can pull it back down. And the cool thing is it's very, very reliable. If you look at this data durability number, this actually means that if you're storing 10 million files or objects in Amazon S3, you can expect to lose one every 10,000 years, which is pretty amazing. A lot better than my computer at home, I'm sure. Amazon S3 is also fairly inexpensive. You can, for most of the things we're showing, we're going to stay way under that 5 GB free tier that you can get on Amazon, at least for the first 12 months. So it's a solution that we've tightly integrated into Alpha Transform and into the companion product Alpha Anywhere as well. And I'm going to show you how all of this works. So to begin, how it works. Amazon, so I said this was S3 and it says that it's the simple storage solution, but as you can see, it's got all kinds of different pieces here, all kinds of storage options, all kinds of things like that. I'm going to really simplify it today, and that is the only thing you really need to know here is about what we call buckets. Think of buckets as, well, in the old days, you'd call them directories on your hard drive, but you could think of them as folders, right? Whether it's a folder on your hard drive or a Dropbox folder or something like that. A bucket is Amazon S3's way of saying this is a container in which you're going to store all of your files. All right, so last week, I showed you in Alpha Anywhere the ability, let me just pop forward, to create a collection of files that would be created into what we call a manifest and placed up on a place like S3. In order to do that, though, you need to build what's called a storage connection string. I'm going to show this to you first, and then we're going to dive back into Amazon to show you how you can get what you need for this. So in Alpha Anywhere, again, you can get this for free at alphasoftware.com. You're going to open up or create a new web project. You're going to go into the Tools menu and you're going to choose Storage Connection Strings. In there, you'll be allowed to, it'll ask you for a connection name and a connection string. You'll type that in, you'll click the build button, and next screen, you're going to come to a dialog box that looks like this, the storage connection string builder. There are different storage providers that Alpha Anywhere supports, but the one that we're going to use with Transform, like I said, is Amazon S3, and that's the default choice, so you won't need to change that. Now, coming down here, there's only a couple of pieces, well, actually about 4 pieces of information that we really need to pay attention to. The first is the region, and that is where the data is going to be stored. Amazon has got a bunch of them. I think in my account, it defaults to the Ohio region for some reason, but you can change it, and you'll want to change it to whichever server region is closest to where your Alpha Transform users are going to be to reduce lag in terms of downloading. Now, it's not going to be a huge deal in terms of lag, even if you put it someplace far away. Let's say you're in the UK and you put it on a US server. It's probably going to be okay because this information, first of all, is zipped up. It's not a lot of information and it gets downloaded all at once. So the lag time probably shouldn't be bad. But if you're going to choose a region, choose the one that's closest to your users. The next pieces of information listed here are the access key and the secret key. This is kind of like a username and password, if you will, that'll get you into your bucket. And the last part is the container name and optional path. This could also be called bucket name. So if you're choosing Amazon S3, just think of this as the bucket that you're supposed to type that in. Okay, so I'm going to show you now how we're going to go through the Amazon S3 process so that we can get all of this information filled out for us. So let's jump over to the Amazon S3 website. You'll find that, or I'm sorry, the Amazon Web Services website. You can find that at aws.amazon.com. Now, Amazon offers quite a few services besides just S3. In fact, so many that it's easy to get lost, but they have a search function up at the top. So I've just typed in S3 into the search function, and it showed me the S3 service. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and click on buckets. You'll see that in S3, one of the features. And if you've never created a bucket before for your account, there's going to be a big orange button here which says Create Bucket. If you already have created a bucket, you're going to come to a page which is going to list the buckets that you've created, but you're still going to have the Create Bucket button. Okay. Once you click Create Bucket, you're going to be asked for a couple pieces of information. The first is going to be the bucket name. That's the thing that was referred to as the container in the previous screen. So I've called mine Transform Bucket 220620. The next thing I'm going to choose is the AWS region. Like I said, if you can actually look at my account up here, oh, that's set to global. Sometimes it's set to a specific area, and I think that's what influences what the default choices are here. Nevertheless, you can choose whatever you want, and the one that I chose was US East, North Virginia, US East 1. All right, so that part is done. There are a couple other pieces of information that you need to enter when you are creating a bucket, though. One has to do with object ownership, which you actually don't need to enter. In fact, you can skip it. I'm going to skip that right now. But this section is very important. Block public access settings for this button. By default, you are not going to have public access to your bucket. However, you need to have public access in order to be able to get to the files from the Transform client, from the Transform application. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to shut off block all public access and just make sure all of these are unchecked. When you turn this off, I believe all these are also unchecked by default. Now, Amazon is going to give you a little warning. It's going to say, whoa, if you turn off all public access, that means that the objects in your bucket will become public. But that's exactly what we want. So we're going to click OK. I acknowledge that that's the case. There it is. And then down here, the only thing we really have to mess with is the Create Bucket button. And if we press that button, it will create the bucket for us. And here is our bucket right here, Transform Bucket 220620. Now take a look at access. Objects can be public. Now probably some of you are saying, whoa, Dave, that sounds dangerous. You know, I don't want my stuff out there. What if I've got things in my database that are private? Well, for a lot of people, the kind of stuff that you're going to be putting up on your S3 bucket is probably no big deal if it's accessed by the public. And on top of that, the URLs and the file names to get there are pretty obscure. However, this may not cut the mustard for certain types of data. If you're putting, I don't know, personally identifiable information into your database, you may very well want to protect that so that you can't simply get to it by pointing to a URL that you suddenly figured out how to get to. And the way you could do that is by setting up a VPN. I'm not going to do that today, but basically what a VPN will let you do is it'll make sure that, so a VPN is an application that can run on your mobile device, and it can basically always have the same IP address. There are different ways of configuring it, but you can configure it to always have the same IP address. Then back in Amazon, you would configure that bucket to only allow people in from that IP address. So not only do you have to know the exact correct URL, you'll have to be coming from the proper IP address. And that's the way that you can lock that down and keep it safe from the outside. Like I said, it's pretty obscure. It's pretty hard to find these things. And if you're just putting in stuff like product data and service history and things like that, it may not make any difference to you. I'll leave that up to you. Okay. Now that we have created our transform bucket, our transform bucket here, this is the information that we're going to now fill into the container name. Okay. So far we've chosen S3, we've chosen the region, and now we've chosen the container. So the next thing to do is to find out the access key and the secret key. And if you're brand new to S3 and you start looking around in S3 to find your access credentials, you're not going to find them. And that's because Amazon S3 is not where you get your access credentials. There's in fact another service from Amazon which is used for handling that. So don't bother looking there. This is where you need to go. You instead need to go back to that find box like we did before when we typed in S3 and type in IAM, like I am. And that will show you this particular service, which you can click on, and it will take you to the IAM dashboard, Identity and Access Management. Now, this is a thing that you use for all of the, sorry about that, which we use for all of the Amazon Web Services that you may have. In my case, I'm just using S3. It's also given me a couple of security warnings here because of the way that I've set up my account. I'm using what's called a root user account, which basically allows anyone who has it to use any of the web services that I've set up. So it's a set of access keys that I really wouldn't want to get out into the public. One way that people handle this to make it more secure is instead of using what's called the root password, they create a particular user, which they could do right here by clicking on the user part in the dashboard. And when they create a user, they can say that user, for example, is only allowed to use Amazon S3, and maybe they're only allowed to read files from S3. In this case, it'll need to read and write files. But you don't have to give the keys to all the other stuff that you have in Amazon Web Services. So you may have RDS databases, you may have some other things. In my account, the only thing I'm using is S3, and so I don't care. So in this case, I just created a root user dashboard because it just saved me a step. Either way, though, whether you're using a root password or you've created a user, what you're going to do is you're going to say manage access keys. And when I click on that, I'm going to get a screen which says your security credentials. And on it here, I've got the 2 access keys. And for the root, that's all you're allowed to create are 2 access keys. And you'll see them down here. So here are my access keys. If I had just 1 or I had 0, then they wouldn't be listed here, of course, but the create new access key button would be lit up and you'd be able to click on it. So let's pretend for a minute that I just have 1 access key and that this button is accessible, that I can go ahead and click on it. And I'm going to do that right now. And what that will do is just immediately create an access key. When that access key is set up, this part here will be hidden until you click the little triangle, where it'll give you your access key and your secret access key. Those 2 pieces. Think of it, like I said, as like a username and password in a way. Now, you can copy these down, put them somewhere safe, or you can download them as a text file and put them someplace safe on your hard drive. But this is the last time you'll ever get those credentials from S3. It only shows it to you once, or I'm sorry, from IAM. It only shows it to you once. And so if you lose your credentials, what you'll need to do is delete your key and then and basically create another one and then resupply that access key and secret key to any of the processors that are using that. So I think you can see it right here in this dimmed out window on the right. There's an action which says delete. I did that before, so this access key and secret access key is already no good. So don't bother trying to type this one in. All right, so once I've gotten those two, I'm ready to paste that information in. Here's my access key that I got from IAM and my secret key that I got from IAM. And now my storage connection string builder is all set. And I can make sure that this works by going ahead and clicking on test connection. But there's something else that I'd like to do, just kind of as a sanity check when I'm setting these up. It's not necessary, but I'm going to show it to you anyway, because you might find it helpful. And that is that I use another client, another piece of software called Cloudberry. Now, I believe Cloudberry only runs on Windows. So if you have a Mac like I do, I had to run it on the Windows side or on my Windows machine. And what it lets you do is it's kind of like a file explorer that is for working with different types of storage options, one of which is Amazon S3. So I went into Cloudberry. Once I set it up, I went into File, I chose New, and this dialog box appeared, Add New Amazon S3 account. So I gave it a name just so I know how to refer to it later, and then I entered in my access key and my secret key, and when that was all done, I went and I took a look, and sure enough, this is what I found. Now let me just show you a little bit about this interface. It's kind of cool. Whoops. When you're working with Cloudberry, you typically have got these two side-by-side windows. One, you typically will show your local computer. It doesn't have to be. It could be some other site, you know. And then a different computer or a different source. In this case, this is Amazon S3 is the source. And as you can see, it says transform bucket 220620. That's the name of the container that we built. So we know that we are able to connect to this container using the credentials that we got from IAM, and we're able to do it in Cloudberry. So we should be able to do it in Transform, and we should be able to do it in Alpha Anywhere as well. All right. So now that that's done, I can go back to that on-device data screen that I showed you last week. And I can choose that storage connection string that we just built, and I can put this in. Oh, and how did I find this? Sorry about that. Remember I told you last week, there is a button here or a link here called Define S3 Properties. So as you're adding stuff that you want to include in your phone, you're going to build it here in this underlying dialog box, on this on-device dialog box. And one of the things you're going to do, keep doing that, is click that Define S3 property. So it knows where to put it. So in other words, it's going to take it, create files from it, create a manifest file, which lists all of the files that you're including. And it's going to put it up into your S3 bucket. You just need to include the storage thing and the folder name. When that is done, you can then add all of the files. Actually, you can do this in any order you want. You can add the files first if you want, and then do the S3 properties. In this case, I made it, excuse me, really simple. Oh, excuse me for 1 second. All right, excellent. Doing a lot of fast talking here. Just needed some water. Okay, so here I've included just one file that I want to put on my phone. But of course, last week I showed you can add all kinds of things, including the SQL databases and PDF files and all of that. So this would be filled up with all the things that I would like to put on that technician's phone. Once those are there, I'll then click the Generate Manifest Files button. And then I need to give a name of the manifest file, which I call manifest.json. Don't worry about this too much. It's basically a file that Alpha Transform is going to use to know which files it should download and from where. Okay, that's all set. So once that's done, and I've clicked Upload Manifest Files, it'll move it up to S3. And then just as a sanity check, I've popped back over here into Cloudberry. And sure enough, there's that manifest.json file as well as a zip file has now been added to my transform bucket. And I can't show you here, but if you were to double click on that temp file and open it up, you would see that that image that we had just added is in fact in that zip file. Transform takes everything and puts it in a zip file just because it's much faster. Even if it doesn't compress, it's just much faster to send one file at a time than to send a whole bunch. All right, when that is done, you can then click the Show Manifest URL/JSON section. And you can grab a link to the manifest, which I've done here. Pop over into Alpha Transform. And this is where in the Define On-Device Assets file, you put a link to where your manifest is. As you can see, I don't have a link here. I actually have some JSON data. And what's cool about this box here is that it can handle either one. If I put in the JSON data, let me back up here because as you'll see in the manifest URL and JSON dialog box, I did have a choice. I could choose the URL or I could have shown the JSON instead. So this URL simply contains the JSON. So anyway, so all I had to do is basically paste in that link. I can get rid of what's here and paste in that link. And that is all that we need to do now to hook up our Alpha S3 to our Transform account. So I know that was a lot of information to cover in a relatively short period of time, but I wanted to do all of this just in one chunk today. So over the last 3 series, we've shown you how to build out the form, how to build out the database, and how to get the database and the other assets onto the device. So next week, what we're going to be tackling is putting it all together, and that is writing that little bit of code that you're going to need in order to connect, in order to make your form operate. In other words, to have it so that it can access that on-device data, both the things and otherwise. All right, so are there any questions? And if there are, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And it doesn't look like it. Oh, hang on a second. Let's see. Can you show pasting the URL into the assets box? Sure, I can show that. Let me just pop into a live version of Transform. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And let me open up Transform. See, you're making me do it live. That's fair. Transform.alphasoftware.com. And I'm going to pop into here. And let me just refresh my login. Great. I'm going to go down here into Define On-Device Assets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that JSON there. I'm going to delete it. Bang. And I'm going to paste in that URL. And I'm going to save it. And that's all there is to it. Any other questions? It doesn't look like it. Wonderful. If you do have questions, go ahead and send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar where we finally tie all those pieces together and show you a working app. Until then, take care and stay well. Thanks again. Bye-bye.